Welcome to the Millennium Counseling Center podcast, where hope is yours, it's time to soar. I'm your host, Orrin Madison. It's time to rise above and celebrate healing, hope, and recovery with the Millennium Counseling Center team.
Special thanks to Kaz Source, who helps us with the production of our podcast. If anybody needs any help or looking into podcasts, please reach out to Kaz Source at kazcontent.com.
My name is Dr. Chantelle Thomas, and welcome to Blind Spots, where we have conversations about the parts of our experience that we cannot see, but know are influencing our lives, our world, and our relationships with others. So I'm talking with Derek. Can you introduce yourself, Derek, and what you do?
Sure. Thank you for having me. My name is Derek Bylsma. I am the executive director and one of the partners at Millennium Counseling Center in Chicago, Illinois. We are a group practice in downtown Chicago and have a number of different things we do: individual therapy, group therapy. We have an intensive program and a program that specializes with athletes.
Yeah, which I just learned more about this morning because you were kind enough to come to me, which is incredibly generous considering the drive, and it was raining cats and dogs this morning.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me. You have a beautiful space here, and it's always good to see you guys. So
Thank you.
Glad you had me in.
So I was thinking back to the first time that we met each other, and was it at the Freud Meets Buddha conference in Chicago, or was it that weekend?
It was either there or at the Manor.
Yeah. I think it's when you came to the Manor.
Yeah. I know I saw you again at the Freud Meets Buddha Meets Freud. Freud Meets Buddha, whatever it's called.
That's right. You came to the Manor. It's a real pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you.
I love Millennium Counseling, and I have had the fortune to talk to Orrin on here, who's your partner at Millennium. The two of y'all own the program, yeah?
Correct.
Yeah.
And he's an amazing guy.
He's pretty special. Well, one of the reasons why I love this podcast is it gives me an opportunity to get to know someone better. Like, I feel like I understood so much more about Orrin after doing the two sessions that we had together on here, which was really helpful because we have shared clients and refer back and forth. So it's nice to get to know someone in a little different capacity.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then I think we did like that panel discussion at Millennium, right, around the Me Too movement, and that was with Orrin.
Yeah.
You were there that day, yeah?
I was there, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, lovely. So you're such an interesting guy. I love people who come to the field not as their first profession.
Yeah, we like to have those folks on our staff.
Yeah.
They seem to do really well and have just a good understanding and perspective of the world. And not that you can't have that without previous life experience, but I think the more diversity you have, then it gives you more of ability to kind of see things and work through things and understand things, I guess.
Totally. And I love the idea of bringing in perspective from other disciplines that informs how you think about the experience of learning to know someone. And I was just speaking with someone yesterday, actually, about the fact that, like, I also did not start in this profession. I did a circuitous path. And I was an English literature major in undergrad, and I thought I was going to go that route, maybe be a teacher or writer, and how invaluable that's been to me as a clinician, my experience with that.
Yeah.
And then I worked in the restaurant industry for a really long time.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah. Wow. I didn't know that. I bet you were good in that, though. You need to be very personable to do well in the restaurant industry.
It certainly helps.
Yeah.
It helps with that. It helps with multitasking. I was actually just telling one of my staff members the other day that someone who was a really good waitress or like a food server, those skills translate really well to our clinical coaches at the Manor because there's this piece of customer service. There's being able to track multiple things at one time. There's the capacity to regulate in the face of a crisis.
Yeah.
How to accept responsibility for errors that aren't yours.
Yeah, you're right. I mean,
there's a lot of stuff, right?
Yeah, it's a good match.
Yeah, totally. So when I meet people who have spent some time in the restaurant industry, I'm always a little bit more curious. It's a good translate.
It is. Yeah. I worked in some restaurants and I worked as a bartender and as a server, and my parents were really into making sure we worked and understood that. So I started working at a young age. I got a paper route when I was 11 and basically have worked since. But it's I think the service industry in general is I think really good for people. If you have the opportunity to work in that industry, I think it's good to learn about life, like exactly what you just said.
Well, and it really helps to I remember, so I worked, I think I worked at Macaroni Grill when I first opened in California.
Yeah.
And I started as a hostess, and then I worked as a hostess, a busser, because I was bored of being a hostess. I didn't like standing at the podium. I learned something about myself. But then I also worked as a busser and a food runner, and then I was a waitress, and then I worked as a bartender. I actually am amazed at how much of my experience working in that role like influenced how I thought about how their relationship with alcohol.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think it's you see people in an environment where they're just kind of being themselves and not guarded or
that's right.
Or maybe they are guarded, but they're not necessarily guarded to you. Maybe they're guarded around the people they're with, but they kind of let that down when they're sitting at the bar or ordering drinks or having dinner. And I think it's definitely a good way to understand people at overall and kind of the habits and the different ways they kind of navigate through things and
the culture of being a regular like is a fascinating thing, right? Like this really deep desire for connection. When people don't have those people in their lives.
Right.
Like how many people consider like their family the people that work in a restaurant? I mean, I can think of so many people that come to mind when I think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's there's a whole show, Cheers, based on that, right? I'm dating myself, but it's there's an entire show based on that sole concept.
Going where everybody knows your name.
Right.
A sense of belonging. Oh, that's so interesting. So how about your early career experiences? And I'm just curious about that route for you and how you think it has shaped you as a clinician.
I grew up in a family that was very it wasn't very business oriented. It was mostly helpers. My dad was a teacher and my mom was a therapist, and my sister was always interested in being a nurse and now she's a pediatric oncology nurse. And so we didn't have a lot of money growing up and things like that. My parents got divorced and my mom was starting her career and my dad was a teacher. So it was, so I think that when I got exposed to, after I played soccer, and then I played soccer for a little bit afterwards professionally, and then I got into the staffing and recruiting business, which is really sales. That's what it is. I mean, it's kind of selling the ability to recruit and staff other businesses, and so you're exposed to a lot of different people. But I think that the sales aspect of it, I was comfortable with just talking to people and kind of, getting to know kind of just that interaction. But the pushing of things and trying to get people to do things that maybe they didn't want to do or didn't know what they wanted to do. I think I was always a little bit uncomfortable with that. I think I got more comfortable with it as I was in that business for a while. But I think that we saw in that business, it's, you're interviewing a lot of people. I spent a lot of my days just interviewing people as prospective employees for companies that was my client. And so I think it was in a lot of ways, a really interesting transition because I really spent all day, every day talking to people then, and now I spend all day, every day talking to people. So I think the focus is different, and the things that, my piece of that, my kind of involvement in that is different. But I think that just learning to understand what motivates people, and I think a big thing for me, and I think this is something that I think about a lot and use in our practice a lot, is just the concept of perspective and, kind of how people look at things and what angle they take on them and how that can significantly change your experience with something, and I think some people kind of boil it down into optimist and pessimist and things like that, but I think that's a little too simple. And so I think that it's just just that concept of perspective is something that's really interesting to me. And I think that I feel like I think this is probably true for anybody who does what we do, but I think that I feel like all of the things that have happened to me in my life, good and bad, have all been practice for, it was all training. It was like one big long school for ultimately being a therapist and working with people, because you run across these people who have all these different backgrounds and things that are going on in their life.
Yeah.
And so I think that, so I don't know if that answered the question properly, but I think that concept of perspective is something that's really interesting to me, and kind of just how we look at things. And the other thing about that is we can shift that. We have some control over that, right?
Yeah.
And we don't necessarily have a lot of control over how we feel about things, but how we look at things or how we think about something, we do have some control over. And I think that can ultimately affect the way we feel about things. If we shift our perspective and ultimately our actions, that can affect the way we feel. But I think as human beings, we spend a lot of time and effort trying to change how we're feeling. And I'm not sure that I've figured out somebody who can instantly, right. Like, cause if you could be happy whenever you wanted to be happy, I'm pretty sure we'd all just be happy all the time. Right. Like, I think if we figured that out, we'd be like, well, I don't want to be anything but happy. So
hence why they created Disneyland.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So
interesting. So you mentioned playing sports professionally.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just say a little bit more about that time period in your life? I'm just so curious about it.
Yeah, I mean, sports were always a big deal in my life. My dad was a college football player, and I grew up when I was younger, I played baseball, basketball, and soccer, and I just happened to be, basketball was my favorite sport, but I was a little guy, and which I'm not so much a little guy anymore. But
I was going to say, I don't see the little guy part.
Yeah, I had a growth spurt my freshman year in college. Yeah, when I graduated. Really? Yeah, I graduated high school. I was like 5'9", 160, and then by the end of my freshman year, I was like almost 6'3" and 205 or something. So yeah, which really helped me in sports. But
no doubt.
Yeah. So I started off at a small liberal arts college, D3 college, and did well there, and made All-American a couple of times, and wanted to play Division I. So I transferred to University of Wisconsin in Madison and played there with the ultimate goal of playing professionally. This was years ago, before the MLS was around, which is now the professional league. So they had these different leagues. I actually got drafted to play indoor here in Milwaukee.
To play indoor soccer.
Indoor soccer, yeah. So they had professional indoor soccer. And the funny part about that is I really wasn't very good at indoor soccer. And after they drafted me, I talked to the general manager, and after a couple of weeks, he's like, you're not really that good at indoor soccer. And I said, oh, yeah, I know. And he said, well, why didn't you tell us? And I said, you didn't ask me. You just asked me if I would play soccer, if you guys paid me to do it. So I did.
It's a different game when it's indoor.
Completely different. Yeah. I'm a big guy who needs space, and I'm not an overly technical or skilled player. And so the indoor is not built for somebody like me. So
it's more like fine motor movements.
Yeah. It's a lot of, short, quick movements and highly skilled, highly technical with the ball and things like that. All the things that I didn't have. And so I think that I was able to use my size well, but I was much better fit outdoors. So I went to there was a professional team here in Milwaukee outdoor. I signed a contract with them, and then ultimately went out and played in Portland for a year as well. So,
Portland, Oregon.
Yeah. And it was good. I'm glad I did it. It was a good way to spend your early 20s. And then I also realized it wasn't going to be a career. It's not the same thing as playing in the NFL or the NBA. We don't make that kind of money.
Financially.
Yeah. It's just a different lifestyle, but it was good. And they took care of us, and we had housing, and they made it so it was a decent living, and it was a really good experience. I met some amazing people. And I
was going to say,
and learned a lot about life. I think sports taught me a lot about life, about perseverance and about teamwork, and kind of the cliches that you hear about sports, but I think it's true. And learning how to fail. I think that that's one of the things that sports does is helps you learn how to fail and then keep going. At least for me.
I've always been so fascinated with the concept of sports and sports teams, because it seems to me that there's a certain intimacy between men that's allowable in sports that doesn't exist in any other space. And that's just my perspective. I'm curious if you've ever thought about it in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that there's things that I think kind of traditionally men would, kind of, push back against, right? There's whether it's like being affectionate or, you score a goal and you're hugging and, where you wouldn't, I mean, I think that's changing a little these days. It's not kind of the same as it was when I grew up where it was a little more rigid with that. But I think that, I think it's around lots of things, around affection, around, positive and negative feedback. I think people are less guarded. They're more willing to kind of tell you how they feel, good and bad. And even just on a side note, just the whole environment of a locker room is a whole nother subject, right? Because you've got it's just a different level of vulnerability. People are walking around nude, and there's just all this, and so I think that's a whole nother piece to it. Where
that's so interesting.
Yeah, and with men, that it's just something you get used to, and but I've got amazing friendships from the time I played.
Something just occurred to me. So the only time I hear locker room referenced culturally is around the concept of locker room talk, which had a very interesting, took a very interesting turn during the Trump administration. That's right. And I've never thought about that kind of posturing as a compensation for the vulnerability that someone might feel in that environment. Mm-hmm. Here you are completely exposed.
Yeah. And I think you're dead right. I think that's the... I think that you're right. There's always been kind of this negative connotation with that, a combination of, being able to justify something, mixed with a negative connotation, right?
Yeah,
it's just locker room talk.
That's right. The whole misogynistic kind of objectification of women piece, right?
Exactly.
It gets relegated into that space, and somehow for some people that is more permissive. Yeah. But thinking about the vulnerability of being in that space and feeling really exposed around other men and wow.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. And I think that there's also, I think with teammates, there is a level of closeness that you have with people that particularly if you play with them for several years or things like that. If I look at my best friends in life, they're either people who I had played sports with or they're people that I know from recovery. Those are the two areas of people that I have really close people. I've got other friends mingled in, but those are kind of the areas. It's not from, just high school or just, it's those types of folks. So I think that there's a closeness that comes with, and it doesn't have to be athletics, any type of team environment where you're kind of, working hard together and winning together and losing together and all that, I think it's a special thing. And I think that with that allows people to go back to the locker room. I think that closeness allows men to be more comfortable in those environments. And for some, that means that they show their true colors in a negative way. And for others, I think it shows that they're, kind of the type of person they are in a positive way. It just really depends on the person. But you're right, there's posturing as well.
And the other thing that comes to mind for me is kind of the closeness and intimacy and connections that come from people who've been in the service, in the military. Yeah. That is the other, I'm so curious about cultural circumstances that allow a permissiveness or supportive environment where really deep connections are considered safe in some way or essential. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I got an opportunity to work with veterans for a bit when I was working in San Diego during my graduate school program, and then also here in Madison a little bit. And I've always been really fascinated by what kind of connections are permissible in that space, and spoken to so many soldiers who, when they came back home, that feeling of, while there's this really difficult piece that they're navigating in battle, that many of them wanted to go back, even though what they were experiencing was life-threatening and horrific, and they had a lot of conflict about what they were being asked to do. But the sense of isolation when they left their tribe, essentially, was so disorienting that they would choose to go back.
Yeah. I agree. I think that there is this... it's hard to find your group, right? And I think that one of the things, whether it's the military or, I've got a 21-year-old daughter who wanted to play soccer in college, and she asked me what I thought, like, should she do it? Should she not? And my advice was, I said, here's what I think the best thing about that is that you walk in the first day and you've got 20 new friends, right? You walk in as a freshman in college. And I think that any group like that, military the same way, right? You may not, it's not that you're going to be close to everybody, but you have a common experience that you're immersed in, and it takes away some of the awkwardness of trying to just meet people or find people that are similar to you. You're almost forced into that interaction with those people because you're going to spend time with them. You can't run, right? You can't leave unless you want to quit the team or leave the military. Right. So you're around them, and I think that ultimately creates the ability to have a space for that connection. Yeah. And then some people find it more than others, but generally, I think I'm not surprised at what you said about the military. I think that that would make sense to me, that they would be willing to go back.
I think so many people are just looking for permission to have deep connections in life. I mean, I've talked to my husband a lot about, like, when we've moved locations, like trying to establish friendships or connections as an adult. Yeah. It's like actually like incredibly difficult.
Yeah, it is.
And like, as you're trying to establish a new connection with adult friends, there's something about it that almost feels like dating because you don't want to be too eager in that new relationship where you look like you're desperate. Yeah. And yet at the same time, like, you're trying to read, like, what's okay in that. Is it okay if we invite them over again because we just hung out with them last week? And do you think they're tired of hanging out with us? I mean, it's like all these funny little things, but for me, it's always been like, I just have a real desire for, like, not just hanging out every once in a while, but like really developing, like, friendships that where you feel known enough to feel really safe. Yeah, I guess is part of it.
Yeah, I agree. I was laughing because I think that I'm kind of a guy who puts everything out there. I don't really I don't play the game very well, I guess. So I think that, as we've met people as adults, I think there's some people where I'll be with them for a little bit and I'll be like, you're amazing. I want to spend more time with you. And then there's other people who are like, I don't know that we connect very well. I'm not sure we need to do this
Or people get
again.
a little freaked out, right? Because I tend to be very transparent too. Like, I joke, we have friends in our neighborhood that we met because I met her at the time that I was pregnant with my second kid, and she was also pregnant with a second kid and had a daughter that was the same age as my daughter. I mean, we met at the park in our neighborhood, and we talked for, I think it was like 15 minutes, and then I asked for a phone number. And I remember at the time feeling like that was really forward, but we're not going to make friends if you don't you're not really upfront about, hey, I'm looking for friends. Like, are you guys interested in hanging out again? But there is this thing that you go through as an adult in terms of making connections.
Yeah, for sure. Did you stay friends with that person?
They're our closest friends for sure.
Exactly.
And our daughters are like best friends and...
All because you took that chance.
Yeah,
because you didn't worry about you know what I mean?
I did it, and then I was like, oh gosh, I hope they don't think I'm creepy. But yeah, I was willing to take the risk.
Yeah. I think that's a good lesson in life, right? We have to be willing to take some risks, and you can't play safe all the time. I think that it'll leave you kind of mediocre, I think.
Well, and I think I also struggled a little bit in the Midwest because the culture itself is not super effusive. Like, it takes a little while to tell how people really feel about you. Because people they tend to be very, very nice and very polite, but it's hard to tell if people really like you because they're really just like very nice to everybody kind of. And it's hard to know where you really stand. Whereas like, the environment I came in from Southern California, like, you could figure out pretty quickly whether people were like down with you or whether they were feeling it or, so it's been an interesting adjustment for me just because my husband comes from the East Coast and I come from the West Coast, and trying to get a gauge on whether or not people really like you is tricky here.
Yeah. I think you're right. I mean, I'm a Midwest guy. I grew up in the Midwest, but I think I've lived around. I lived in California. I lived in Hawaii. I lived in Portland for a while. And even on the East Coast. And you're right. There's definitely a thing about people in the Midwest where it's very you're nice, but
Yes.
but not necessarily completely transparent about things. So I can see how coming from a different area. I think I was used to it growing up around it, so I kind of didn't expect anything different.
Yeah.
But you do see it even when you go to other, if you go to the East Coast or the West Coast, right? There's a different level of directness that that people use, sometimes in more of a positive and sometimes more of a negative way, depending on where you are. But I think that I've always appreciated that because I like directness. So I think that when I've traveled to those areas and spent some time there, I think for some people from the Midwest, it's kind of shocking.
Yes.
And I
no
think
doubt.
that I liked it. Like when I went to New York and people were just like, really hardcore straight up with me, I was like, I can handle this place. This is perfect.
It's a little reassuring because you're like, okay, I know where I stand.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I do think having a bit more of a direct approach, doing therapy here in this region has been really interesting for me because I think it does kind of put people back a little bit, but I think there's some relief in it for some people, of course. I mean, it doesn't work for everyone. Yeah. But I think it's why I was so drawn to doing this work here, because I think in the recovery communities, there's when you're dealing with life and death, essentially, you don't have really time to mess around with the niceties. It's like you have to get to the point pretty quick.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that there's a part of me that has always been really drawn to that because it's felt like there's a level of authenticity in those spaces sometimes that I've struggled to find in other spaces. Yeah,
I think that's true. As you were saying that, I was kind of thinking about that because I would say that the people I work with would definitely say I'm very direct. I don't think I'm ever accused of walking around things, but I think one of the things about that is that I feel like, especially if you're talking about recovery, I'm so confident in the idea that life will get better and that there's a way out of this and that it doesn't have to be the way that you think it is, that it's not hard for me to be direct about that because I it's almost like I have this little secret and I'm sharing it with you and you get to decide whether you want to believe it or listen to it or follow it. But at the end of the day, I'm not hoping it would work it's just, I know that there's a better direction. And so I think it's easy to be direct when you're really sure of, not so much sure of myself, but sure of the message, I guess.
Yeah. I love that you're saying it that way. And I actually was just thinking about that. I was actually just talking to a friend of mine who does couples therapy. And I was thinking, I have a similar sense of assuredness also around working with trauma. Like I know it will, if people stick with it, I know that it will get better. Like I feel really confident that we can support people in feeling more whole, more integrated, less shameful, less alienated. And for me, like the tracks of substance use and trauma are parallel on the train. I mean, there's so much overlap between the two and same with the addictive cycle. It's interesting because so many people, I think in the field instinctively like stay away from addiction because I think there's a lot of fear that they're going to be manipulated. They have a hard time making sense of the insidiousness of the cycle. It's easy for them to get frustrated or burnt out. And yet at the same time, I love that you articulated it in that way because I think there's so much hope in this work. Like it's so easy to hold hope for someone because you know that something better is available to them. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I guess that's I think I said something similar to this before, but that there's a path out of this.
Yes.
Right? And I know even for myself personally in my own life, I think that that's what I struggle with is that I started to doubt whether there's a path out. Right. And I started to doubt whether that really is there. Is there really any way to get out of this? Right.
Yeah.
You're almost too deep. And, and I think it's one of the beautiful things about being a human being is that, and I talk with people I work with about this, but I also use this in my own life is that I can wake up tomorrow and I can be whoever, I could have been anything for 52 years, and I can wake up tomorrow, and if I want to be something different, if I want to have been a liar for 52 years, if I want to wake up tomorrow and all of a sudden be somebody who's overly, too honest, then we can do that. And yes, we can't erase the first part. You can't erase the past, but we do have that ability to shift. And it doesn't mean that it's easy, and it doesn't mean that that it doesn't take a process, but it's possible. And I think just that feeling of the possibility of something different, or of some hope, or of a better life, or being happier, or not so much, trauma or chaos, or whatever those things are, right? I think is something that draws me to the work and allows me to feel good about, essentially promising people that life will get better if they can have faith in a process or their own work,
I think it's that this work makes space for transformation in a way that I think sometimes is harder to see when you're working more incrementally with other types of conditions. Mm-hmm. Like, that something transformative can happen. And it's not just noticeable difference. It's feels like a different person has shown up in the room to some extent. Yeah. Or is been granted permission to show up in the room, or whatever. There's been an invitation that's been extended. And that, I think, for me, it's a big part of, it's not magic because it's a lot of hard work, but it's like, it's really cool to see people transform.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. When I first meet with somebody, my hope is that I can connect with them well enough and be, and have them trust me enough to just try, to just try whatever we're talking about doing, just try. Because what I know is that if they do that, they will then establish what I always refer to as kind of personal historical data. So they will have then, instead of me telling you your life will get better, they will now be able to say, oh, life is better, right? Yeah. But in the beginning, they don't have that.
They have to trust that it's possible.
Yes, they have to trust that it's possible. And I think that's the real challenge for the work that we do is, and the people who tend to, do really well in this are the people that can connect with people immediately and quickly and gain their trust. And like I said before, that's easy to me, in my mind. That's easy because I know that I'm not going to break that trust. I know that I'm not selling them a bill of goods. I'm telling them something that, if they give it the opportunity, will ultimately be true. And so that makes it easier for me. And I think people read that. I think people sit down with you and they realize that you're like, whether they believe me, they definally think I believe me. They definitely think I believe in what I'm saying, so
because there's a love they're sensing a level of authenticity there.
Yeah, I think so. And and just,
which makes sense to me from like just having always encountered you as just a very solid person, like self-assured and not needing to, over promote anything. I mean, we just had a conversation with our staff, and you said something that kind of stood out to me, just in terms of, you let your presence speak for itself. Like, that's been my experience of you.
Well, I appreciate that.
It's true.
I don't know about that, but I appreciate it.
Are you not good at taking compliments, Derek?
I don't know. I guess, I don't know. Maybe I'm not. I haven't thought about, I guess I just don't get very many.
Oh, it's hard at the top. Yeah. Like when you're running an organization, that doesn't happen as much as maybe sometimes we'd like.
Well, I appreciate it.
It's true. Yeah. Like just steady, like a steady presence and just a good person. Like you've always, which is like really encouraging to have people doing this work that show up that way consistently. It's one thing to have like a good moment, and then it's another thing over time, because now, I mean, we've known each other for close to 5 years, I think. Yeah. And you learn about a person through the work they do when you share clients. Yeah. Right? I mean, it's a really interesting way to build a relationship with someone is through clients.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I like and respect you so much, is because of exactly that, is because of working together and with common people and knowing kind of the effect that you had on them and the work that you've done, and even just the way that you treated them and the connection that you made and all those things. Like, obviously, I've met you and I've always thought highly of you in just our interactions, but I think there's another level to that when it comes to seeing kind of how people work with people, especially in our area of work. And I think that that's where like a lot of the just respect comes in, right? It's just like a respect for somebody's overall, I've always thought that as long as you're here, then you guys will be in very good shape. So they better make sure you don't leave.
We're not going anywhere. No, it's so cool though, because I think, the respect piece and the thing that I've always really appreciated about knowing that when we send folks to you, that there's no interest in leveraging off of their vulnerability. Like, there's no desire to use kind of where they're vulnerable as a leverage point so much as desire to develop a safe connection. And what feels so important about that and making sure that you create a space that doesn't feel really judgmental is that I have a really strong sense from my time talking with Oren and also with you and the folks that I've met at your clinic that people are going to be able to share about things that normally would never come into the therapy space, which to me, like my hunch about why so much of therapy is ineffective is there's a certain kind of darkness and vulnerability that's never actively invited into that relationship. And if it's, you're not seeing all the edges, then there's something in the room that doesn't feel safe or is not giving it permission to show up. Yeah. I agree. And I think a lot of that comes from this idea that there's, and I think, I guess this kind of thought process that there's an issue and then there's a solution, right? Like, so this is what we do for, if you've got depression, then you do this. And if you, and I think that the people that I see that do really good work don't look at it that way. Right.
They it's so individualized for each person, and they take the context of the situation and they take the whole picture of what's going on. And then they get to know the person a little bit and realize that, I think that, kind of the idea of, treating to diagnosis, right? Like
yes.
you're just taking a diagnosis and you're deciding treatment based on just strictly that.
Yeah.
In some areas can be effective. I'm not sure that works well for us, even as far as like people who, are in the recovery community, people who are more open to 12-step or not open to 12-step, or, I think that there's ways to do these things, but I think we have to identify why those things are helpful and why they're important. And can you get those things from other areas? But just the idea that I'm not going to have a community, I'm not going to have a support system, kind of the things that are helpful, and not to get all into 12-step, but I'm using that as an example. But I think these things that if you can identify why some particular solution is a good solution, and then if there's somebody who has a problem or an issue with that particular solution, then I think you just need to find why is that a good solution, and is there other ways to get those same positive things?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, I think it's about the creativity that there's a lot of different roads there.
That's right.
Right. And so anytime you get super invested in one particular road, you stop listening to what's happening in the room. And what I've come to appreciate is, unfortunately, I think there's so few spaces that people feel safe to really show up in.
Yeah.
They're just like, many people are very skillful at shifting into some type of performance mode or automatic pilot. So it looks like they're present, but they're not fully present.
Yeah.
But they're just kind of going through the motions because they have figured out, this isn't a place where I can really talk about what actually matters to me.
Right.
So they just kind of shift into regulation, and then, you're just rolling tape.
Right.
Which is, what a bummer.
Yeah.
Because the saddest part about that is that a lot of people have been in therapy for years and they they don't know how to make sense of why it isn't working.
Yeah, I agree.
They don't go, maybe this person isn't reaching me. They go, I guess I'm kind of unhelpable. And nothing is changing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like the biggest risk, I think, for so many people when therapy isn't moving anymore.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't, I mean, some people will say like, well, maybe I need a new fit, but I don't know if they give enough permission, they attribute enough permission to the modality or kind of the interaction effect. Because it is a relationship.
Yeah. Well, and I think also helping them understand kind of where they are in the process, right? I think that with, kind of with the typical type of person I work with in the beginning, we're just stopping we're stopping this. I always use this analogy where it's like a ship going down the Chicago River, and your goal is to get to Lake Michigan. And so you've got this giant barge on the Chicago River, and you figure out you're going in the wrong direction, right? So you've got this big, heavy boat going in the wrong direction. So the first thing we have to do is we have to stop going in the wrong direction, right? Yeah. And then we have to turn it around so we're facing in the right direction. And then we need to start heading in the right direction. And then eventually we'll pick up steam and get to where we're going. But I think a lot of times people don't necessarily know where they are in that process. And so their expectation is that they're going to, they think because they're, addressing a situation that all of a sudden they're going to be at Lake Michigan. And I think that, part of that is helping people understand expectations and where they are in that whole process and what's a win, right? Like what really is important at that time. And I think that if you've had people who have been, kind of have gotten, they've slowed down or gotten away from just all the chaos and they're heading in the right direction, then they can start to understand what that means. And it's more about personal growth and those types of things, where in the beginning, it's just kind of stopping bad behaviors more than developing good behaviors or processes or perspectives.
Yeah. Stopping the cycle of self-destruction.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. So.
I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more about working with athletes, because I think this is super interesting. And you shared with our team that this is a program that y'all are doing at Millennium. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something I'm passionate about. There was lots of things that I learned in my years in sports, and I'm still a high school soccer coach. I coach high school in Chicago, and I think that as I mentioned before, there's a lot of really good things I learned from sports and that were really helpful. And I think there's also some things that can be negative given the circumstances of the people. And I think that one of the messages that athletes get is, we see a resistance for athletes to seek therapy, right? They're less likely to seek therapy. But what's amazing about it is can
you say something about that? Like, what do you think that is?
I mean, I think it's an old school. If you take a look at kind of how society has progressed when it comes to even just the idea of therapy, right? If you look at the difference between in 1990 and today, if you're talking about therapy, it's much more accepted. It's more open. It's more valued. It's, it's more mainstream, right? And I think, and I know the numbers support that, kind of statistically, but I think that for a lot of athletes, and I think part of this has to do with that you play for a coach who's older, who probably came out of that generation. So I think some of this is going to change as we move forward. I think the athletes, and we're seeing it when we're working with these college athletes, they're more educated on mental health. They're more educated on, they talk about it. They're more, more open, less of a stigma. But I do think that the age-old kind of message that you get from athletics is, it doesn't matter, men, women, whatever. It's the same message is you like try harder, push through it, figure it out. If you're not winning, then you're not trying hard enough. You're not training hard enough. You're not doing enough. And I think that the thing about, substance abuse, mental health is that, it's not about not trying hard enough, right? The solution is not just try harder. And in fact, sometimes that moves you in the opposite direction, right? Yeah. Like and so I think that and the other thing is, for most of these people, this has worked. This way of operating through life. And for me personally, that always worked.
Yeah.
I was always, anything I came up against, I could just outwork somebody, try harder, want it more, want it, be more competitive, whatever. And it didn't have to be sports I was talking about. It was, it was whatever it was. And I think I learned a lot of really good lessons around that. And I still use those today. I think I've used it in my career. I think I've used it with clients and, that I'll keep persevering even when it seems like, maybe it's not as hopeful, but I think, helping these athletes understand, first of all, that it's okay to that these things are going on. And I think the other thing in sports is, and this is the thing, most people kind of relate therapy with athletes with sports psychologists.
Yes.
And we intentionally go a very different direction in the work that we do is that we are not concentrating on performance. That's the reason why we are working with people, is not to make you a better athlete. And we are working with you because we are trying to make you a healthy human being. And I think that there's so much, if you look, even parents' involvement these days with young athletes and things, like there's so much focus on performance, right? That becomes the most important thing. And if the performance isn't following what you want, or you're not winning, or you're not doing well, or whatever those things are, then that seems to be the focus not only of the team and the coach and the family but it ultimately becomes the focus of the kid. And
you think that's getting more intense over time?
I think that the parents' involvement in kids these days has some. When I was young, I think that the way I looked at it is like my parents were the center, and we as kids were kind of like satellites rotating around our parents. And our friends, this is the biggest example I can use with this. Our friends as kids, my friends were my parents' friends' kids.
Yes.
Right? And now the kid is at the center, or the kids are at the center, and the parents and the family and everybody else kind of rotates around it, but they're kind of the center of attention, I believe. And now what's funny is, as a parent, my friends are my daughter's friends' parents, so it's like, who are you friends with? You're friends with, people that you hang around with at school functions, or who they play sports with, or that's kind of how you meet a lot of these people. And so, to go back to your question, I think that I think we needed a correction. I think we were too far over on the other side. I think we overcorrected.
Like adult-centric versus shifting to prioritizing kids.
Summertime, you'd leave at 7 a.m. on your bike when you're 8 years old, and then they'd expect you home by 9 at night. It was a different, it was a
very
different
permissive. Hands off.
And now we track our kids. We know where they are at all every minute with cell phones and all that kind of stuff. And we're very involved. If they get a bad grade, then we're going to call the teacher, and we're going to do all these things to be involved. And I there's this term, right? Snowplow parents, and not helicopter parents anymore. It's snowplow parents.
Snowplow parents.
Where they just go and clear everything out of the way, so you don't have to deal with it.
Oh my gosh, I haven't heard that.
I love it because it's kind of it's kind of true.
It's a great metaphor.
It is, because that's what happens. You don't have to worry about the snow, because I'll clear it out for you, and then you get to drive on a nice clean road. But
I bet you there's expectations about what that road, they look like on that road if they're clearing out all the variables.
That's right. 100%. And that's what it is.
The pressure there.
Excuse me. And there's we've got private tutors, and we got private coaches, and we've got, club teams. And so one of the things to your question was kind of club sports, or kind of this pay to play model that we have for most sports. You have AAU basketball, you've got club soccer and club volleyball, these things where there's just a continued, kind of focus on performance. And I think that especially when you get to the college level, I think these kids start to feel like they're a commodity. I think they start to feel like they're kind of told that they get you're getting this free education. We're giving you this, you're going to, and I think there's an expectation there. And I can say that as a player myself, I felt that, right? Yes. I felt like I owed the school, and in a lot of ways I did, right? I got a great education, and it was paid for, and that was, but I guess it all goes back to, is that gotten worse?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think the focus on performance has gotten worse.
Well, it's a piece of it that you're speaking to that I hadn't really thought about, because I think what we've encountered in working with people is like the way to decrease the likelihood of real intimacy is to make a relationship transactional. So do the connections that these kids are making, even with their environment or with their team or with their coach or whatever the case is, what do those connections really feel like if they're always hinged on their performance? And like, what does it feel like to establish relationships with that always in the back of your mind? It's not really about you and like your essence. It's about what you produce. And so what does that do for your sense of self and your sense of worthiness if that becomes the primary token of connection?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think that is where we run into some of this need for to work with athletes and to make them help them to understand that this type of help is available, that it's okay. And then what we're doing is we're partnering with colleges, we're partnering with clubs, and so they are not only, some of these colleges which is super impressive. University of Illinois Chicago, for one of them, is they're funding it all. So they're as a school, they're funding it, and they're seeing a need. Their student, the counseling centers of all these colleges are overrun.
They're overrun, right?
They're completely overrun. Yeah, they're 8 weeks behind. So
we must be decreasing stigma. We are enhancing awareness and education about therapy.
Yep.
The people more than ever are manifesting this feeling of like, I can't handle this by myself.
Right. Yep, absolutely. And now what some of these schools in particular are starting to do is, if you look at the resources available to students, and then even take that further and say to their athletes, right, is they've got a personal trainer and they've got a tutor and they've got a nutritionist and they've got all these things. And for most places, some of the more advanced schools, I know University of Michigan has a really big staff around mental health, and there's certain schools that have this. Wisconsin, I know, has a pretty good support system there, but I think that is something that has lagged behind. And so we know this has lagged behind. We know that there's, some people who are taking care of it, others who will be. But my prediction is that every major athletic department within the next 5 years, every major athletic department will have a solution for the mental health treatment for their athletes, whether it's, whether it's using somebody like us or whether it's hiring people internally or however they deal with that. And I think you're going to see these counseling departments across the board are going to have to get larger, and they're going to have to find a solution because most schools, they provide a certain amount of counseling sessions for, and so when these kids find out that there's actually have access to it.
Yeah.
Now some of that's limited because they're so full. And as you know, in this world that we live in, if somebody's ready to do some work and they have to wait 8 weeks, they're not, likelihood that we're ever going to see that person. Well, we might see him again, but it's not going to be in 8 weeks.
8 weeks feels like an eternity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so much can happen.
That's right. Yeah. We might see him in 2 years.
That's right.
Go out and figure things out. So, but yeah, I love the athletic stuff. I think that the thing that I really try to focus on, and I love our team that we have. We've got a woman named Sarah Meister who's unbelievable. I don't think you've met her, but she's she's a master's from Northwestern and just an amazing therapist in person, and was a great athlete. She was an all SEC volleyball player. And I think I mentioned before, the people who we have working with these athletes are all former athletes. And so there's kind of a connection there, immediate credibility, to go back to when we said allowing somebody to trust you right away. That really helps. Who's
been in those shoes.
Who's been in those shoes. But I think just not pulling away the focus away from performance, because as you said, it's too transactional. Yeah.
So, because I'm a person that tends to believe that therapy that is about like self-growth and evolution is always heading in the right direction. Do you sometimes encounter, and this is more, I'm trying to speak to the skeptic, that giving athletes more therapy actually makes them worse athletes? Like, have you ever seen circumstances where if your goal is not on performance and your goal is on other things, like, does it result that they actually decline in their performance at times?
I think that athletes are so programmed to concentrate on performance that I could spend 8 hours a day with a Division I athlete and try to deprogram that, and I don't think I would be able to. You wouldn't make a dent. Yes, I don't think I could make a dent. I think that's so ingrained. Yeah, to your point, because it's being drilled in so early on. Yep.
like, I know we have daughters. I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old. And I already feel an intensity around, I think my husband and I talk all the time, like, okay, so what sport are we going to get him into? And we have this debate because it does have a really big shaping impact, like what you start to expose a kid to at a certain age. And you think, okay, how do I hold my own desire for what I want them to be in to the side? Because what if it's not a natural fit? And do we have to keep searching until we find a thing that, you know what I mean? It's just like a crazy, I feel an amazing intensity around it. And my oldest is 6. And I'm sure some people would say, well, you're already missing your window. Like, she should already have been doing X, Y, and Z, whatever the case is. It's like a whole generation of parents kind of collectively decided that they would reshape their children in a different way. Like, I'm going to live out every fantasy I have through this kid.
That's right.
I mean, I guess that's the danger of, the risk of making it more child-centric. Is it seems more child-centric, but is it really just you living out your fantasy through your child? I mean, I know that's not a novel concept, but I'm just thinking around, what is the thing that's driving it,
I mean, I think you're right. I think that there's a piece of this where when we were young, we would try to, emulate our parents, or we would try to, do better than our parents or whatever. And I think that has almost come in reverse now, where the parents want the kids to be better than they were, right?
Yes.
They weren't good enough at whatever.
Yeah.
And so they so badly want their kids to be good at that. Whereas before you kind of had the kid looking up to the parent and saying, I want to be like that.
Yeah.
And then now you've got the parent kind of looking down and say, well, I want you to be, the goal is the same. They want you to be better. But I think that the amount of involvement that parents have on that, across the board, I think is just more. And certainly, yes, I'm sure I believe that there's some carrying out a fantasy about that. But I also think that people now, and maybe this is true from when, I don't know, because I was a kid, I don't know how parents were, but I think that there's in this kind of society we live in where we're all trying to, you're trying to look good, whether it's through, kind of all the things that, come up with.
Well, there's a leveling up with the social media presence and how you appear in that space,
absolutely.
Right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that the amount of kind of street credibility you get from having a child who is good at something is greater than it probably was in years past. And so I think it's now kind of just another example of how you're doing well in life.
It's an ego extension, right?
Right. Yeah, and you're right. Social media is a big driver of that. Social media is a whole nother subject, of course, but it's, it's a highlight film of life, right? It's all the great things about that are going on. And so everybody looks at that and says, wow, look at all these people's amazing lives. And then I've just got this regular life. I need to figure out a way to make that better. And maybe it's by having my kid be a star athlete.
I always wondered how much of this was attributable to my parents' cultural background, because my parents were born in South Africa. And so was my brother and sister. And it's funny to hear you say, like, even in your generation here, coming from America, it was parent-centric still too. So there's definitely a generational thing that supersedes the cultural piece. But piece for me as a child, at least within my family system, where, make sure I phrase this so it doesn't sound too strange, but my dad really drove home this idea for us that if you're suffering on some level, or you're working hard, or something creates suffering, it must be good on some level.
Yeah.
Like that was definitely a message. And if you were enjoying yourself and you were having fun, you were probably missing an opportunity to be better, or to progress, or whatever the case is, right?
Yeah.
So by that virtue, that generation of parents, at least within my very small sphere, had a high tolerance for watching their kids suffer. And because they came from a survival generation, that I don't think there was the permissiveness around, there was not the luxury of emotional expression and exploration.
Yeah.
Because I think many of their parents were just trying to survive or not die.
Yeah.
So there's a whole generation of people that were raised with parents that were so unattuned to their emotional world that now there's this compensation where I'm thinking about these snowplow parents. They're so worried about their kids suffering or struggling that there's this pendulum swing that if they're feeling discomfort, the only thing they can reference is their own history, right? As opposed to like, can we still recognize like the value of your child being uncomfortable or the value of your child hurting even, or not getting exactly what they want? And I can feel it in myself, even though I totally believe as a therapeutic standpoint, like I'll move into the pain, the discomfort. I believe it creates great healing. As soon as I look at my kids, I can totally feel that reflex of how do I set them up so I know they'll be okay no matter what? And like, what does that look like?
Yeah. It's funny, right? When you were talking about that, it was like, it was making all these things go around in my head. And one of those is that, yes, like as a therapist, I completely, there's all these things that I believe in, right? But that when it comes to my own, myself, but also my belief about me and also kind of the way I was brought up. And then similarly, how many athletes are taught is like, I mean, as you were saying that, I was thinking, well, like anything worthwhile in my life has been hard. Like that's what I was thinking. As you were saying that, you're like, you have to have pain, those types of things. And I was literally, because I say it, I say it to my daughter, I'm like, they're like, this is hard. Well, things that are, anything worthwhile is going to be hard. And
I'm bored.
So it's
good to be bored.
Exactly. Yeah. So I just realized I have this own internal conflict, right? That it's like where you see it, and you're right with kids.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that you so badly want everything to be good for kids.
Just want it to be good for them.
But I think what you said about the pendulum is exactly right. I think we were way over on one side. I think we overcorrected to the other side. And my hope is, and I believe this will be true, is that we'll come back and it'll
swing
in the
back,
middle.
Like eventually the arcs aren't so great.
That's right. And we'll settle in the middle, which is probably where we should be.
Yeah. So what do you think are there any other kind of unique things that you've come to appreciate about working with like an athletic population? I know one piece that you said is like it really actually does help to have therapists who've been in that world, like understand it in that way. Are there other pieces that you think that stand out for you in terms of how to reach?
I mean, I think one thing would be is that their outlets have generally been sports. Like that's that their way of dealing with anything has generally been sports, because especially as you get to higher levels, right? Then you're talking about people who became specialized at a younger age and they were playing. And I guess that's another difference these days is, when I keep talking about like when I was a kid, but it was, we played 3 sports. We had basketball season in the winter, we had baseball season in the spring, and we had soccer season in the fall. Now, to your point of where you said your 6-year-old might be too late to.
It's too late. She's Mr. Window.
That's right. I think that, parents, and my philosophy is really against this. I don't think you should specialize kids at a young age. I think you should have them play multiple things. And I personally believe they will end up being a better athlete. Yeah. And there's actually some research about that. Yeah. But I think that so their outlet has been since they were 10, if they're really good, if they're going to go play Division I or something like that. So, or even in college at all, right? Or high level club or whatever, or even varsity high school, when they got to be 10 years old, they were year round in that sport, right? They were now you've got indoor, you've got outdoor, you've got club, you've got high school or middle school or whatever. Yeah. And so I think all of their outlets became around that, their friendship groups. They're like when they're stressed, what do? They go for a run. They go. So we all have our ways of kind of getting these things out. And I think that the coping mechanisms, so much of that is around sport and or something to do with it, right? Yeah. Not necessarily maybe just the sport, but I think that showing them that there's other ways to do it, even if we're just doing some, teaching them about meditation or teaching them. And I think like the differentiation between meditation is not a way for you to be better. That's not, that the purpose is not. So a lot of times we'll talk to these athletes about meditation, and they'll say, oh, you mean, the mental imagery. And we'll say, no, mental imagery is a focus on trying to be able to understand, kind of the proper way to do something so you can follow through with that. So your body understands what the goal is, and then you can, psychologically will connect to your performance.
That's like an athlete who's visualizing their performance ahead of time. Yeah,
exactly. So they will say, we'll be like, meditate. Oh yeah, I've done that. Yeah. And so I think just this idea that there's actually something there that is just set up to help you be able to feel better about these things that you can't really talk about or haven't been able to talk about or don't feel comfortable talking about. So I think it's just a big thing is just that this is a new solution that, and actually what we see is when people start, we've got more first time. I mean, we've got a lot of first time they've ever been to therapy. We've got a lot of those folks in
therapy naive.
Therapy naive. And they will be like, wow, like I can just come in and you, all you care about is trying to help me feel better. Like that's your only goal. You don't care how I play or what time I have to go to practice. You're 100% focused on helping me. And I think the thing is that we don't have any vested interest. We don't have a vested interest in any outcome other than just helping them. And I don't think they've ever had that before.
Totally.
Not with a coach, not with a parent, not with and so it's just new, so I think it's beautiful.
It's really sweet. It almost brings me to tears to think of just what it means to be in real connection without an agenda for them.
Mm-hmm. All these different groups have their own challenges, right? Yeah. And I've even had people say to me, like, well, the athletes, I mean, they already have everything. Like, why do you guys need to, they've got a great life. I mean, they're they're on scholarship. Paper. Yeah. Yes, there's challenges that come with wealth. There's challenges and I think that's sometimes hard to see that all those things have their own unique challenges because they seem like these are good things that, so why is that a challenge? But at the end of the day, it's just different, right? It's a different challenge.
It is not a group that necessarily garners a lot of empathy. Right?
Yeah.
In the same way, I mean, we work with folks who are high level professionals who have a high net worth at times, and that can really be looked down on. Like, those people have everything, so why are you helping them? But the set of challenges, it's almost more insidious in some ways because no one can see it. And everybody projects onto them that you should just be so grateful and you're so lucky. And so many people fantasize about being in your shoes. It does bring to mind the whole thing that transpired around Simone Biles in the Olympics. And I'm sure that's a big marker in the athletic world. Yeah. At least it seemed to me from the outside perspective.
Yeah. And, the pushback that she got for that was amazing to me in such a disappointing way, that people said things like, well, that's just selfish, or she didn't care enough, or she didn't, it's just mind blowing. Yeah. Right? It's just so ignorant and naive, and hearing people who you kind of feel like should know better. Right.
Right.
And I think that was because I felt like it was such a, incredible, selfless, kind of just
courageous, beyond courageous,
and all those things. I mean, think about this. This woman has spent her entire life training for that moment, and something is so off that you feel like you can't do this thing that you've been training for.
You're actually scared for your safety.
Yes, you can't.
It's mind blowing.
Yes, right.
That people would villainize.
Yeah.
Because just don't even mention the cascade of emotional implications that she had to navigate around feeling like a failure or not feeling enough or whatever the case is. And then you have this whole chorus of people attributing it to a certain kind of precious selfishness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, wow.
Yeah. The word that I kept hearing in that really kind of got me angry was weak. This weakness. And I had a conversation with someone, I think it was actually on a podcast, but it was asked me a similar question, but it was like, look, you cannot get to that level
by being weak. It's
just like it's completely nonsensical.
Yes, right. Yeah. And think of how bad it must be. Think of how bad of a place she had to have been in, that she would pull herself out of that. It's...
I mean, the closest proxy that we have for superheroes are athletes probably in our culture, right? I mean, I think to some extent actors and actresses kind of get lumped into that, but I think athletes even more so.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Like there's a fantasy about the superhero and they do seem superhuman in their capacity.
Yeah.
So what does each person need to do to project onto that in order to feel okay about the world and how things are and how they exist? And so then you have that fantasy about, the impenetrability of, the USA for that matter, right? Yeah. Like who we are as a nation and all these other things that in one moment gets shattered.
Yeah.
And then this horrific backlash, which is clearly about people's own process and their inability to tolerate or make space for the complexity of the human experience. I mean, it's just like mind-blowing, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And
it's wild.
Yeah, you said a lot there that's interesting. I mean, even just about the country and, kind of that, and you were talking about kind of superheroes, and I was thinking that there are these different things. There's athletes and there's wealth and there's appearance, right? All of those things are kind of have their own thing that people in quotes look up to, right?
Yeah.
And I think that
or can fantasize about in terms of what that means, right? And an athlete encompasses many of those at the same time.
Yep.
There's like no accommodation for the human underbelly of that and what has had to be, sublimated, compartmentalized. That's why I found that documentary about Michael Jordan.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my gosh. I was riveted.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you watched it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I watched it. And I think that...
I was riveted. And I'm not even a big basketball fan necessarily. I mean, I grew up with Michael Jordan. I totally remember... and Scottie Pippen, and I remember that as a kid, but I wasn't my family were not diehard athletes and they weren't big basketball fans or anything like that. But that documentary, and also the one about Tiger Woods, I mean, we could go on and on, right?
Yeah.
But I'm so curious, what stood out for you in watching it or what that was like for you?
I mean, I think it's the part about being exceptional at sports that makes me wince a little. And that is that being ultra competitive can help you get to somewhere, but there's a price to it, right?
There's a price to it.
There's a price to that. And so do you want to be Michael Jordan? I mean, you've heard about how people talked about him. They all respected him and they all thought he was good, but he wasn't very well liked. It wasn't
necessarily easy to be in a relationship with, it seemed, right?
Yes. He wasn't very well liked, really. I mean, he was respected and people felt like he made them in some ways, he made their careers and made them who they were. But I think that, there's a price that goes with that. And I think, to go back to what we talked about before, there's a price that goes with that as a parent, is that, my daughter, who's actually my stepdaughter, but I was so careful to not go out and she was a good natural athlete. She was she had the natural ability. And I was so careful to not be that parent who was forcing her to go train and work out and all that stuff because because I didn't want that trade-off. I did not want to, it wasn't important. And I think it probably because of what I do, but it was not important enough for me for her to be good at something that I was willing to give up having a good relationship with her. And,
that is so, I mean, just footnote there, just take it in, parents. It wasn't important enough for her to be good at something that I was willing to sacrifice having a good relationship with her. Oh my God, it's so good.
She may disagree and say, well, we didn't get either, but I'm just kidding. But I think that's
so great. I mean, because you can fill in the blank with anything, right?
Yeah. smart enough, whatever intern you get. And yeah, I think, I'll tell you something that I think you would find interesting based on some of these things is that when I first started working with athletes, I was working with pro athletes and a lot around substance abuse, but usually around both substance abuse and mental health.
Yeah.
And the thing that I found is that this was kind of at the core of it is because I had worked with some people who were pretty well known and pretty successful and I would talk to them about what kind of fed them, right? Like what fed them, and it was competition, it was money, it was attention, it was the game, right? And then there was a lot of it that was about kind of attention from whoever their world of whoever they're attracted to or attracted from, right? So for a couple of these guys were men who were attracted with this, so they would talk about the attention from women,
right?
And then they get away from, so all of a sudden they retire. Right? They get away. And so what happens to all those things? Like, they make less money. They're not in the news anymore.
Right.
They're not playing anymore. They don't get to compete anymore.
Right.
They're not as kind of
revered.
Yeah.
Yes.
They don't have those things. So then how do I fill that space? And I always explained it to them, like, it's like, if I took all those things that you just gave me as examples of what made up your life, and you had a pie chart that was 100% full, and each piece had a little bit of these things, but 25% was money, 20% was attention, and all of a sudden, now all those things went to only fill. Now your entire pie was only 40% full, right? Because each of those things got smaller and smaller, and so now you've got this giant 60% that you've got to fill. And how are you going? Yes, and how do you fill that? Right? You fill that. Generally, what we know is that
with alcohol,
yes, with things that aren't healthy,
with a very big bottle.
Yeah, that's right. And that was exactly right. With unhealthy behaviors is what that vacuum was filled by.
Numbing behaviors, right?
Absolutely.
Because you don't want to feel what that 60% of emptiness feels like, right?
Yeah.
We see this all the time with clients that we treat in retirement. Like, it's a really significant transition point for these like self-made business people who've worked and driven their entire life.
Yeah.
And then they pull back from the role, the thing that they were going for the whole time, to get to the place where they could, I think the fantasy starts out like, I want to do so well that I can retire comfortably without that pressure. And it's a vacuum. It's wild.
Yeah, I know. I thought about this the other day because I've always joked with my wife that I would probably work till I'm like 75 because I love what I do. She jokes and says, as long as he can still sit in a chair, he'll be seeing clients. But I think that I was thinking about this the other day because I was like, or is it that I'm afraid to stop being busy? Is it that I don't know how to do, and I don't know how to stop, right? I haven't ever done it in my life, and so like, is it just that I'm afraid of that? Like, is that why? So this is something I'm currently thinking about.
So I love that you mentioned that. I love that you mentioned it because that's like maybe a curiosity around a potential blind spot. Is like, what might exist in that space if I slow that down? And it's a great awareness. I have a very similar concern, I think. Like, who am I if I'm not in motion in this way?
Yeah. I think in our meeting earlier, several of you used one of my favorite words, which was just curious. And you just said it again. I just love that word when it comes to us as people and how we're navigating through life. And I think that there's so much value to the ability to be able to be open to being curious and willing to just say, well, maybe it's possible.
Well, it's the ultimate opponent to fear is curiosity.
Yeah.
Because it's really hard to stay curious when you're in a fear process. And as long as you're in a curiosity process, it dampens so much of the fear.
Yeah.
Which I think fear is just such a big part of what stops us from looking, growing, evolving, right? Like, it's such a big part of it. Especially when it's unnamed, when you don't even know that that's what's operating behind the scenes all the time.
I know. I have a great story for you around that. When I was first in early recovery, I was talking to some people and, I don't know, complaining about some, I don't know, whatever I was talking about. And some guy who I didn't know walks up to me and he handed me the traders in Chicago used to have these cards that they would have to give, like financial traders, they would like to submit an order.
Yeah.
And he walks up and he just hands me this card. He doesn't say a word. He just hands me this card and he walks away. And I look at it and it just says on there, it says, replace fear with faith. And it was like this thing. And I literally took it home and just like spent like hours thinking about it. I was like, and I was like, what is faith? Like, what is faith to me? Like, what was he saying? Was he saying religion? Was he saying, and what I came to the conclusion was, and I share this with a lot of people I work with is that it's just the possibility that everything will be okay. Yes. And I think that's what faith is, and maybe even going beyond the possibility, the probability, right? Yeah. Or whatever that is, but just that idea that like, cause fear is always like, this is what terrible thing is going to happen.
It's not going to be okay. I mean, that's what fear is, right?
Yeah. It's not going to be okay versus being okay. And, one of the philosophies I live by is this word of neutrality. When any single thing happens in my life, I rarely get too upset these days about anything because I don't believe we have the ability to judge whether something is good or bad when it happens. I think we have to let it play out. And so on a scale of 1 to 10, if a 1 is bad and a 10 is good and something happens, your wife gets sick or something happens, this must be a 1, right? This has to be a 1. And so what I challenge myself to do, and I challenge the people I work with, I say, okay, you might be right. It might be a 1, but it also might not be. Maybe by getting sick, they found a tumor that saved her life or whatever. You never know what could happen, right? And so by getting to that neutral point until you really know, the little secret that I don't tell people is that you don't really ever know because it's not really ever over. Right.
It's still unfolding.
Yes, it's always still unfolding. Yeah. So you don't ever really get to just be totally negative.
That's right.
If you stick with the neutrality, but you don't have to tell yourself that or others.
Oh my gosh, I love that. This has been amazing. What a fun conversation.
It was a very fun conversation.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for your time.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate you having me. I love the work you guys do. I've got great respect for you as a person and the work you do and the group that you've built and what you guys do is incredible. And you're very well respected, liked, and I think everybody knows that you guys are extremely intelligent, really good at what you do, and ultimately the most important thing is that you absolutely care and are compassionate and you just want so badly to help people. And I think that's what I love about the world I live in is that there's a lot of those people, and you're definitely one of them. And I feel lucky to know you and appreciate you having me on the show.
Oh, it's such a nice compliment. And I could say every single of the same words to you, my friend.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Derek.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Millennium Counseling Center podcast. Where hope is yours, it's time to soar. Continue along your journey of healing, hope, and recovery with us next week. If you want to learn more about mental health, recovery, or if you just need someone to talk to, send us a message on Instagram or fill out the contact form on our website at millenniumhope.com. We are here to talk.